Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
I'm your co-host, Rich Gear, and Doug has got a very interesting show here for us, and well, hopefully it'll be interesting to you out there, about a little bit about the life of Blaise Pascal. And who was he, Doug?
Well, he was a French philosopher that lived in the 17th century. He was born in 1623 and died in 1662 at the age of 39.
Boy, they did not live long back in those days, did they?
But he was a child prodigy. He was educated by his father, and in 1642, he invented a calculating machine.
First one, right?
The first one. And he also was very famous for his natural and applied sciences, that he did a lot of work with fluids and clarified concepts of pressure and vacuum. And
is he known as a mathematician, or
he was a mathematician,
kind of one of those,
yes.
almost like one of those Renaissance guys,
Yeah.
as far as it come to thinking? But
he was a genius, and even when he was like 16 to 19 years old, he was recognized for many of the different things that he had invented or figured out.
Or thoughts, things he would come up with. But he was, he lived during the time of the Sun King, right? Louis XIV, a little bit.
Right.
Louis took, it was, around about that time, 1640s or something like that, when
Right.
Louis XIV came in.
And a lot of the things that Pascal worked with and invented are things like probability theory. And this stuff is used by people like actuaries to figure out, what the lifespans of people are and what the risk.
We've all run actuarial tables, yeah. Okay.
And it's sort of like taking things that are fuzzy in nature and then
quantifying them and clarifying them,
and putting them into a risk analysis, so you can figure out how well it'll come to pass. And in fact, part of this was something that Pascal used in his theology, was that he said that there are certain things that we can't really get down to figuring out. And
I think that was the thing that I was fascinated with, reading some of the stuff a little bit before this, is he really left a lot of room in his thinking for revelation.
For revelation and even emotional decisions.
Intuition.
And figuring things out from that standpoint, that the science, the reason science isn't all that there is. And I think that he was very wise in the way that he worked that out.
It was interesting, though, the term figuring it out kind of indicates you can figure something out by just reason. Right. And that was what he did not believe. That your reason alone was its own providence. It was his own sphere, and it was valid as far as it went. But there are certain things, like first principles he talks about, that you couldn't really touch by reason alone, by mathematical equation. It did not work. Even though this guy himself was a brilliant mathematician, I thought that was very interesting.
Another thing that he's famous for was what is called Pascal's triangle.
What's that?
And that's where you start out at the top with a 1, and then the second level is a 1 and a 1, and then the third level is a 2 and a 1, where the middle part is the addition of the two figures up above it. And then there's 1, 3, 6, 3, 1, I think, is the next line, and it goes on down there. And this is actually used, Pascal's triangles actually used in a lot of different mathematical constructs. There's sort of like a beauty to it, sort of like Fibonacci spiral, where.
Well, but you see Fibonacci, that was numbers. But you could see it in nature.
Right.
Is this triangle used in nature at all, or or mathematics?
It's something that actually makes a lot of sense, and I'm not going to try to explain.
Yeah, we don't
want
to.
That's not the
point of this, the exercise of this show, right? Okay.
Yeah. He did a lot of worked out how to calculate the volume of solids, like a conic section. This was he was the first one to figure out how to actually calculate this stuff, and so he actually was predated Newton, and so Pascal probably provided the foundation for calculus, because a lot of things that Pascal talked about was the concept of infinity. And he actually begins his thoughts, and I've been reading his book called Pensees. I downloaded on my Kindle here, and so I thought I'd read a little bit of what his thoughts are. But he's famous for this Pascal's wager. And
by the way, Pensees means thoughts.
Thoughts, yeah.
Okay.
If you think of pensive, the word pensive, it means you're sort of thinking about something, and that's and this was actually Pascal's life work that he had written down. He had intended to publish it, but he died at 39.
Sure.
So he had left it unfinished, and so what happened was that after his death, his followers, collected everything that he put together and put it into the book, and it was published in 1670. And what he did with the wager was that he actually begins with the concept of infinity. Now let me read what he's talking about here. It says, "It is incomprehensible that God should exist, and it's incomprehensible that he should not exist, that the soul should be joined to the body, and that we should have no soul, that the world should be created and that it should not be created, and so forth. That original sin should be and that it should not be." So he's got these different things that he's contrasting. And he says, "Do you believe it to be impossible that God is infinite without parts? Yes, I wished therefore to show you an infinite and indivisible thing. It's a point moving everywhere with infinite velocity, where it's one in all places and is all totality in every place. Let this effective nature, which previously seemed to be impossible, from which there may be others of which you are still ignorant. Do not draw this conclusion from your experiment, but there remains nothing for you to know, rather that there remains an infinity for you to know."
So he's dealing with the concept of infinity right now.
Right.
What this whole thing is about. Yeah, because I mean, when the trick is when you read stuff like that, it's like, boy, there's a lot of thoughts in that one thought, you know.
Right. And then he just has another thought: infinite movement, the point which fills everything, the moment of rest, infinite without quantity, indivisible and infinite. And so he's just pondering, what is infinity? But without infinity, you cannot do calculus.
Yeah, and that was Newton's big thing was calculus, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that Newton? But so he built on Pascal's. Now, anyway, he said he's famous for Pascal's wager. Again, we were talking about that earlier, Doug, because what basically in a nutshell is Pascal's wager?
Well, I'm going to sort of condense it for you.
Yeah,
first.
condense it, yeah.
And then maybe I'll read a little bit of what he says about it, because it's really profound. He says, "Consider the God of the Bible. Either he is or he isn't. If he is, and then you trust in him, the promise of the Bible is eternal life and the benefits of knowing your purpose in life. Mm-hmm. And there's all sorts of benefits that you and I have experienced as a result of being in fellowship with the living God. But if he is, if he exists, but you do not trust in him, then the consequences are eternal and great."
Now it's funny you say that, because Doug, I came to a knowledge of the Lord with this very ideas, but they were revealed to me by revelation. I had never heard of Pascal before that. In school, I don't remember studying about him in school, but I was never into mathematics. I was never into chemistry or even philosophy. They didn't teach it. I never heard of this guy until much later.
Well, I'll let you tell that story after I explain the rest of this.
Oh, there's more to it. Okay, keep going.
Now, the other option is, well,
this is the second part.
Let's presume that God isn't real.
Right.
Okay. But if you trust in him, You have the benefit of hope in this life, and you will be faithful, honest, humble, grateful, generous, a sincere friend, truthful. These virtues that you gain as a result of trusting in Christ and having a faith, a simple, humble faith, are real. And you won't have the poisonous pleasures of glory and luxury and stuff like that. There's certain things that you'll put aside because you are acting as though God is real. Now, if God isn't and you don't trust Him, there's nothing to be gained. And so I think that it was the time that I shared a little bit with you at the master's house.
No, it was at your grandma's place.
Yeah, it was at your grandma's
Yeah, it was because at the master's house, it was a place that was kind of a Christian coffee house place.
Right.
That's where Doug and I first went down there. I was just first exposed to people called the Jesus people back in the early days. 1971, Doug. We go back a ways, folks. And but it was the next day that I there were things that happened during that first initial thing at the master's house. But I went home and I was very troubled, and I don't know whether I slept much that night. I couldn't tell you. All I know is all the next day I tried to come over and talk to you some more about this. And of course, Knucklehead Doug, he was gone all day, and so he didn't come home until it was really dark. It wasn't dark actually, because that's part of the significance of this story. He came home maybe about 6:30, something like that, and it was early. It was June. I think it was June 4th or someplace like 1971. The days were kind of long, and Doug started talking to me, and I started asking questions, and he was talking. And along the time, it's kind of funny, and I've talked to Doug about this many times since, but for a long time I wasn't sure whether he saw what I saw. But it's those of you who are out here in the middle of summertime. You ever had it where you're talking and it's getting darker and darker, but your eyes are adjusting slowly till finally it gets to a point where you can't adjust anymore, and somebody says, "Somebody turn on the light." Well, right before that time, Pascal's thoughts came to me in Revelation, and I thought to myself, either Jesus is who he said he was, or Doug is telling me he is, or he isn't, and I either accept him or I reject him. And I thought, now to myself, 3 out of 4 of these are kind of losers. Although Pascal talks about even if he's not real and you do it, then you actually live a better life. Although that's kind of arbitrary in the sense that if there's no God, there's no standards for right and wrong anyway. But it's just something it's kind of like what the founders would call truths that are self-evident. There are things which morality and truthfulness and faithfulness, honesty, humility, we almost universally recognize them as true, even though none of us seem to obey it,
Right, yeah.
entirely. But I saw that and I said, Doug, and I said, okay, well, yeah, but if he is who he said he was, and I reject him, the consequences are horrible. If I accept him, the results are incredible. So I said, Lord, if you are real, come into my life and change me. Because I don't remember exactly the words of the prayer, but because I knew I was a mess. And it was at that time that I could see very clear. It was like, I felt like the lights, we didn't need to turn on the lights. The whole room lit up. And I could see everything with clarity. And for years I was not sure if I ever saw this in my mind's eye or whether it was really actually the room lit up. But Doug said he saw it years later. He said, no, the room. And so that's a neat, powerful man. But it was like the Lord was corroborating or confirming something that I instinctively knew in my heart. And Pascal said the same basic thoughts, 300 years earlier. I did not know that, but that's because the same God who was communicating to him communicated to me that night. And it was very powerful.
And in his writings here, and he goes on with a discourse, which I'll read a little, some of it, maybe all of it. But he says that these conclusions came as a result of quite a bit of prayer, because he struggled through this himself, And let me read a little bit of what he said. He says, our soul is cast into a body where it finds number, time, dimension. Therefore, it reasons and calls this nature, necessity, and can believe nothing else. Unity, joined to infinity, adds nothing to it. So if we add 1 to infinity, you still have infinity.
You still got infinity. I see what you're saying. Yeah, okay, I gotcha.
Nor more
gotcha.
than 1 foot to an infinite measure.
Yep.
The finite is annihilated in the presence of the infinite. It becomes a pure nothing. So our spirit before God, so our justice before divine justice. There is not so much a great disproportion between our justice and that of God as between unity and infinity. In other words, if we compare ourselves to God, we're just like nothing to in comparison.
Yeah, we're like one.
Right.
And to infinity. Okay. Yeah, I think it's fascinating though.
Mm-hmm.
That thought is profound, but I find what I find equally profound is the infinite values us as something.
Right.
I think that's kind of amazing, you think about that. So anyway, Doug, how did you get into this, looking at this Pascal stuff? I mean, what kind of, how did you sort of get into it?
Well, I had sort of thought about some of the early philosophers that I wanted to read their writings, the early Christians who actually made a difference in our society.
Including developing a lot of the science and mathematical principles of the modern day. I thought it was fascinating. Oh, I'm sorry, Doug, go ahead.
Reading, and so I chose Pascal's Pensees as one thing I was going to read through. Now, I'm about 1/4 of the way through it, but it happened on this particular part of it, which he is most famous for, and so I wanted to talk about it on this show.
Well, he said Pensees. I said, for those in Michigan, this is Pensee, not Penske. Okay, we're not talking about the racetrack down in the southeastern corner of Michigan. Well, Doug, because the other part that was interesting is there was a couple of meetings that he and another famous philosopher, René Descartes, they had actually connected up a couple of times. Now, Pascal's French, and Descartes, what is he?
He's French also.
He's French also, but Descartes, it seemed like, based on what I was reading, kind of was hiding out, or was in exile, or is living somewhere away. I don't know why that would be, but I was reading in the article that we had earlier about that. But but this time he hooked up with Pascal, who was actually ill at this time. Pascal was 24.
Yeah.
And so he was out there, and he came the next day as a physician, but he was there because he believed that reason could figure everything out.
Right.
And Pascal says no. They had respect for each other, mutual respect, and even maybe some admiration, but they really came to diametrically opposite conclusions on the infinite. Yet René Descartes, as far as I know, was a believer. At least I think he was not an agnostic or anything like that. But
yeah, his argument is what is called an ontological argument.
Right, I remember studying that when I was in philosophy class in college back in the day. Yeah,
and he's the guy who came up with the phrase "I think, therefore I am."
Yep.
And so he it's sort of a heavy thinking that they go through in this. But Pascal's wager, he says, let us examine the point and say, God is, or he is not. But to which side shall we incline? Okay, he says, let's make a reasonable choice. Reason can decide nothing here. There's an infinite chaos which separates us. A game is being played at the extremity of this infinite distance where heads or tails will turn up. What will you wager? According to reason, you can do neither the one thing or the other. According to reason, you can defend neither of the propositions. Do not then reprove for error those who have made the choice, for you know nothing about it. No, but I blame them for having made not this choice, but a choice. For again, both he who chooses heads and he who chooses tails are equally at fault. They are both in the wrong. The true course is not to wager at all.
This is according to who?
But then he goes on and says, yes, but you must wager. It is not optional.
Okay.
You are embarked. Which will you choose then? And he's making the argument that you can't arrive at reason, but you can. It says, let us see. Since you must choose, let us see which interests you the most, or interests you the least. You have two things to lose, the true and the good, and two things to stake, your reason and your will, your knowledge and your happiness. And your nature has two things to shun, error and misery. Your reason is no more shocked in choosing one rather than the other, since you must of necessity choose. This is one point settled, but your happiness, let us weigh the gain and the loss when wagering that God is. And so then he gets into this argument. If God is who he says he is, then you have all these benefits that will come about as a result.
Biggest one, as far as my biggest benefit, I think, is you actually have a hope, and
right.
That creates a purpose for your life. I mean, I think those who don't, I've never understood, Doug, by the way, in our modern culture, those who have chosen atheism or even agnosticism, Doug, because if God is not, they've stripped themselves of all hope, even in this life, because they don't believe anything in the next one. And
right.
there's no hope for them. There's no hope. There's no purpose. No reason for being. And we've said this for years and years and years. All morality and senses of morality have to be stolen from a theistic worldview, most notably Christian, Judeo-Christian, because things like morality, things like truth, you're going to go the way of Pontius Pilate. What is truth?
Right,
it's whatever you say it is, okay? Which means it cannot be truth because the next guy could contradict it. Therefore, there's no true truth in that sense. Things like humility are without value or without virtue any more than being selfish is evil or unvirtuous. It's because the only way that gives you any of those purposes is if there's somebody outside of yourself declaring there is a purpose, there is a truth, there is a morality, there is a good. Right. And I think that's what Pascal is saying here, quite frankly.
And it's like what Ken Ham used to say. He said, if you evolved, then your brain evolved.
Well, yeah.
And if your brain evolved, how can you really know
anything about anything? I know. It's all an illusion.
And I think that's what Pascal is pointing to, is that for the person to deny God, and the only thing that he's inviting into his life is misery.
I mean, isn't that title one of Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion? Isn't that one? Is that his?
Yeah.
And the God delusion is your delusion that God isn't. Mm-hmm. That's the delusion, because you cannot have any. And it's interesting, Doug. It almost thinks, like to quote a Shakespearean line, "Methinks thou dost protest too much." About a guy denying he's murdered somebody, or I can't remember what the actual context was. But as you're protesting so much that there is no God, because you in your heart know that there is. And I think otherwise, why would you even care? Why would you protest? Why would you argue and put down those people who have this hope, even if you have no hope? It's because, what is it? Is it about misery-loving company? You want to make me as miserable as you are? You want to make me as caustic, as acidic? Because people, I call it the Darwin delusion, if you will, the atheistic delusion. It's an acid that rots the fabric of all things that we consider good, true, and noble. And that's what people don't understand. They go, well, we could be noble. I said, why? What's the point of it? Because you feel better about yourself? It's a delusion then. If there is no God, there is no point of it. You know?
The person who doesn't believe in God and is actually consistent with that, how can you actually live with yourself in that particular?
Well, they do. I mean, a lot of them, of course, a lot of them don't. A lot of them end up killing themselves. Many times that happens. But the point of it is, they don't always. And human beings are have an amazing facility to play the ostrich, Doug. Mm-hmm. They can bury their head in the sand, knowing full well they don't believe in something, yet they hold on to things that make their society work. Okay, we've talked about this, the idea of classical atheism, Doug, which existential atheism is kind of retreating back into. Existential atheism, or if you will, postmodern beliefs, there are no rules, there is nothing rational, but our whole human framework rebels against that. We go back to the truths of the founding fathers, these truths are self-evident. There is such a thing as morality, truth, and goodness. So these are people, they reject the God of the Bible, yet they want to hold on to the framework that the biblical reality constructs. Okay, I think that's interesting.
And Pascal's point that everyone must wager.
You must wager.
It's not optional. And the atheists tend to think that by not making a decision or being agnostic about it, it's
you've made a decision by not making a decision.
That's right. And if the decision is made for God, we find that God comes along and helps that decision by bringing His presence.
Yes.
And it comes afterwards, after you make that decision up front. Then you will enjoy the presence of God.
Doug, the story I told earlier, when I accepted Christ, the whole room lighting up. That's a very overt way of showing what you've just said there, Doug. And in my whole life and yours has been a testament of that, of His presence coming along in difficult as well as joyous circumstances.
Well, I hope that you find this reasonable, and if you don't, the Pascal shows that even if it isn't reason, is something beyond your reasoning
revelation.
capability.
Yep.
There is a revelation that you can have to know that there is a God. We hope you enjoyed our time together in Revolution Against Evolution. We'll see you next time.